This video was sponsored by Squarespace.
Oh, hi. Hey, remember last video when we made these sweet doors? Well, yeah, in this video, I'm gonna make the rest of the cabinet. So enjoy that, but I also wanted to take this moment to tell you that remember when we went to England and we built a bed in that guy's shop/shed? Anyways, that was because he was the winner of our Patreon contest last year. Well, we're doing our next Patreon contest right now. You can enter over on Patreon. You gotta be a top tier patron and you can enter. And if you win, well then I'll come out to your shop and we'll build a project together and do a video. So if you wanna do that, there's a link down there. Go sign up. Most importantly, enjoy the video. I'm still here, I'm just behind the door.
Alright, so last week we made some doors, and now we gotta make the cabinet. I know that's a little backwards, but that's how we're doing it, so get off my back. First thing we needed to do was select a nice, straight, long piece of rift sawn white oak. This is going to be the entire perimeter of our cabinet. But how big are we making the cabinet, you might ask? Well, we're making it however big we need to make it so that these doors fit on it, because as I aforementioned, the doors are already made. So I take the doors and I set them on my outfeed table and I stick a 16th inch spacer on the top and bottom, because I'm going to want a 16th inch gap in the middle so the doors can open properly. Once I have the spacer in place, I measure left to right on the top and on the bottom, make sure that it's consistent, and of course I measure up and down. This will give us the width and height that our cabinet box needs to be, and the depth will be however deep it needs to be to hold a bottle of whiskey, I suppose. Now we're going to take this board and we're going to fold it into a box because I want continuous grain match on 3 of the 4 corners. You can't do 4 of the 4 corners because, a board can't connect with itself when you finish the square. Anyways, so I mark out my separate pieces because before I can do all of this, I'm going to have to mill up this board and get it very nice and square. Because if I want my box to be square, my wood needs to be square. So I mark out my pieces and I leave about an 1/8 inch length on each one of my pieces so I have some room to work with and cut my miters. Then I go over to the joiner and I face joint them and I edge joint them, getting a nice flat surface on one side and a straight edge on the other. And then I cut each board to width, which will actually be the depth of my cabinet, 5.5 inches. With all my pieces cut to width and milled on 3 of the 4 sides, I next need to remark them on the end of each piece. Because now I'm going to go over to the planer and I'm going to plane them all down to the right thickness. And well, I would have planed off all my markings and I would have been guessing trying to get them back into the correct orientation to get all my grain to match. With them planed down to right at 3/4 of an inch, I start cutting my miters. First I start by cutting a miter on one side, a perfect 45-degree angle. After I have that cut on one side, I measure out the width of my cabinet and I mark it on the board, and then I set up a stop block so that I can repeat this cut on my next board and get 2 boards that are exactly the same length. That's very important when you're making a box. 2 sides have to be equal to each other and the top and bottom have to be equal to each other, or else you don't get a box. You get like a rhombus or a parallelogram or something weird like that. Anyways, after cutting all of my miters on all 4 of my pieces, I lay them out just to double check and make sure that everything's the right size and shape that it should be. After I get all 4 pieces lined up and it's looking pretty good, next I can take my cabinet doors and set them on top and just double check that this cabinet box will indeed be the right size for these pre-made cabinet doors. Gosh, I hope they are. Because if they're not, it's not going to be easy peasy lemon squeezy. It's going to be sad, depressed lemon zest. And nobody wants that. Hey, but what do you know? They're exactly the right size. I would say I nailed it on the first try and didn't have to make small incremental trims until it was perfect, but This is a YouTube video and you'll believe whatever I show you. So let's just say I did it perfect on the first try. Next, I just scribble on the top of my box. This is gonna identify that side as the front of the cabinet. This is important when I orient all the pieces. Next, I mark out for a groove that's going to be on the back side of the cabinet and house an internal floating panel. So I set my fence a 1/2 inch away from my blade and I lower my blade to 1/4 inch. I want a 1/2 inch of room on the back of the cabinet because I'm going to put a French cleat back there that I'll use to hang the whole cabinet off the wall. So I run each piece through the table saw twice to bring it up to 1/4 inch groove, and I test fit a little scrap piece of 1/4 inch ply. See, look, a groove around the entire thing. Ooh. Next, I need to mark out for my dados. I'm going to be cutting dados on my sides as well as my top and bottom to hold my shelf in the middle and some nice cup storage that's going to go from the bottom all the way to the top. So on my side pieces, I just need to put a dado in the dead center of each piece. But on my top and bottom piece, I need 2 dados because there's going to be 2 divider things that make up the shelf storage. So I have to do the math and figure out where I want those to land. Math sucks, but sometimes you just have to do it. Next, I set up my dado saw to cut a groove that is the exact width of some walnut that I already milled up and will be using for all my internal dividers. Once I have a nice tight fit into my test piece, I'm ready to cut that dado slot in my actual cabinet frame pieces. So I line up my saw using my Rockler crosscut sled, which I absolutely love for my dado saw. It works great, especially in combination with the J. Katz Moses stop block. And then I start cutting dados like nobody's business. Well, it's my business. Technically, this is literally my business. It's how I make money. But that's none of your business. Well, actually it is. It absolutely is your business. That's why I post these videos and show you. So it's both my business and your business. Long story short, I just started cutting all the dados in my side pieces as well as my top and bottom pieces. Until now, my cabinet frame looked like this. I got a mitered box, I got that groove for my floating panel, and now I have the dados cut for my cup storage, and I got the dado cut for my shelf that'll be an internal divider. It'll be whiskey storage on the top and bottom. There's just one more thing we have to do before we glue this up. I decided I was going to use these brass rods as kind of a little safety net so the bottles of whiskey wouldn't fall off the shelves. So I mark out where I need to pre-drill to insert those brass rods because I won't be able to do it after I glue this whole thing up. So I mark out for those holes on one side and I mark out for the holes on the other side. Then to make drilling them out a lot easier, I use this spring-loaded punch that you've seen before, also available on my website for purchase, to just pre-mark all my holes so that I can get my drill bit seated right where I want it. Then I drill a 3/8 inch hole into the side of my panels, both on the top and bottom. And I drilled this pretty deep. It was 3/8 inch in diameter, but it was 5/8 of an inch deep because I need to be able to shove that brass rod way in there. That'll make more sense here in a little bit. Don't worry, I'll explain. Then finally, I just needed to cut down my oak plywood for my floating panel and sand all the insides of all my pieces so that I don't have to worry about sanding after it's assembled, because that would suck. Now, whenever you're gluing up a mitered box like this, it can be a royal pain because there's no good place to get clamps on those mitered corners. That's why I always make plywood cauls and I just glue them on with a little CA glue. The nice thing about plywood and CA glue is it holds plenty strong to get some clamps on there, but the plywood is very easy to just knock off when you're all done and it won't damage your wood. Nobody wants their wood to be damaged. Ouch. So with plywood cauls glued firmly on all 4 of our corners, I can start gluing up my box with that floating panel in the middle. Now for these miter joints, I'm just using Titebond 2. That's it. Because I'm going to come back after the glue's all dry and add splines to each one of these corners. The splines will add a ton of strength to that joint as well as give us an option to, strut our creative flair. Is that a coherent sentence? Strut our creative flair? That doesn't make much sense, but I don't care. Between the cauls and these woodpecker clamping squares, this glue up was a breeze, and with that, I was ready to move on to getting my splines prepped so that I could, add those when the time came. Now, our cabinet doors are made up of a combination of walnut, white oak, and an orange backer. We're already building the cabinet out of white oak, so I thought the splines would look really spiffy if they were walnut and orange. So I got on Amazon and I bought a sheet of this orange acrylic. And my idea is to wedge it in between two pieces of walnut to give this cool layered effect. Kind of like a walnut and orange acrylic Oreo cookie. Something along the lines of this. I thought it would really tie the whole vibe together. But before I could glue these three things together, I needed to abrade the surface of the acrylic. Scuff it up. Make it so that the glue would have a better chance of adhering to it. Speaking of glue, I'll be using Thixo Fast Cure from Total Boat, baby. Because Total Boat's the best, and this stuff's insanely easy to use. It mixes in the tip, you just gotta spread it out, and voila, instant bond. James Bond. Sorry, walked into that one. After getting Thixo spread on one side of my acrylic, I spread some more Thixo on the other side, and I sandwiched that beautiful orange plastic in between two even more beautiful pieces of black walnut. Then I just clamped the whole thing together and waited patiently for it to dry. Who am I kidding? I'm not patient at all, and I'm definitely not going to stand around and wait for this to dry. So back to the box. While we waited for our splines to dry and our cabinet box was still in clamps, I figured I could start working on our internal dividers. So I measured how wide they needed to be to fit inside of our box, and I started cutting up my black walnut. The first piece I cut was going to be the shelf that separates the top from the bottom. It's usually kind of what shelves do. I got it measured and cut so it perfectly fit into our dadoed slots. Next, I'm going to cut the two divider pieces that are going to go from the top to the bottom and make up our cup storage rack. Now you might be thinking to yourself, that doesn't look like a cup storage rack. Well, I'm not done yet, you ninny, so just hold your horses. Now, because our shelf is going to bisect our cup storage rack, we're going to have to employ the use of some half-lap joinery so everything fits together. So I mark out exactly where our shelf is going to bisect our cup storage, and I cut halfway through the board, the exact width of the board itself. Did you get that? Halfway through the board and the exact width of the shelf itself. This should allow it to half lap over our cup storage, which I also cut halfway through, the exact width of the shelf itself. Like this. Nice and clean, like James Dean, who is not clean, by the way. He's dead. So, he's probably all icky. Too soon? As you can see, with all of our half laps cut, our shelf now fits nice and nested into our cup storage rack thing. Oh, but we're not done yet. Oh no. In fact, we are just getting started. But you are going to have to wait.
What are you doing, man? Oh, hey. I'm just designing a website. You have a piece of paper taped to your laptop and you're just drawing on it with a Sharpie. I'm not a web designer, Jason. This is literally the only thing I know how to do. Why don't you just go to Squarespace? It's an all-in-one web design platform. Anybody can make a website. It's easy. Yeah, but what if I don't want it to just look good on the computer? What if I want it to look good on mobile too? Literally all their websites are mobile friendly. So if you design it for the computer, it's gonna look just as good on your phone.
Yeah, but what about adding product? Because right now I can just add product right here, and it seems pretty easy.
You're taping things to your computer. I don't even understand how that makes any sense. You can literally create an online store on Squarespace and sell whatever you want. It doesn't matter if they're physical products like this sweet swagger over here, or digital products. You can just upload them and sell as many as you want.
Here's a stumper for you. What if I want my name to be the thing that you type in the little rectangle at the top with all those woos in front of it?
You mean a domain name with a www in front of it? Yeah, you can easily buy those right through Squarespace, and it's simple because there's no hidden fees. And they sell over 200 top-level domains, so you can get one that says .com or .net or .org, or you can even get more specific and get one that says .art.
You do it right on there, huh? So you're saying I could design a professional-looking website, and I don't have to know what I'm doing, and I don't have to draw on my computer screen?
Yeah, well, I think that's very obvious. That's exactly what I'm saying. Here's what you do. Go to squarespace.com and sign up for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch your website, go to squarespace.com/bourbonmothwoodworking. Get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. And peel that paper off your screen first, or you're not gonna be able to see the website. Gosh.
Now that I knew all my half laps fit together the way that they needed to, and all of that stuff fit back into the cabinet the way that it needed to, well, it was time to break it all down and cut some more dados, because we're not done cutting dados yet. So, after taking out my cup storage pieces, I marked on those for some more dados so that I can create some more cup storage and get you off my back about the fact that it doesn't look like cup storage yet. But after this, it will. Well, actually, there's like 10 more steps before it will, but this is one step closer. So I cut one dado on the top and one dado on the bottom of both cup divider piece thingamawhatsits. Oh, and then remember way back when we drilled holes in the sides of our cabinet for those brass rods? Well, yeah, we got to drill some holes in the sides of these for those same brass rods. Speaking of which, here are said brass rods. Now you're probably wondering, how the heck am I going to get the brass rods in between these two pieces of wood? Well, that's why I drilled that hole in the oak so deep. First, I take the brass rod and I shove it all the way into that pre-drilled hole on the oak side. And then I mark where it hits the walnut divider. And then I cut it to that length on my metal chop saw. You know, closing my eyes very tightly because I'm not wearing safety glasses, because that's how the professionals do it. After I get 4 rods cut to that length, I polish them up a little bit with some steel wool. And now it's time to glue in all my internal divider pieces. So first I start with the shelf divider, with the half flaps facing up, not down. Because if they're facing down, well, that would be a problem, because I wouldn't be able to get those other pieces in there. So I just add a little glue into my dado slots, and I lightly tap it in place with a rubber mallet. As you can see, it is a very nice friction fit. It's tight, but not too tight. Is just right. Now it's time to put in our cup storage dividers. So I add some more glue to those dadoed slots, and this is where we do things a little different. Next, I mix up some 5-minute Total Boat epoxy, and I insert it both into the holes on my shelf divider that's going to house that brass rod, as well as into the holes on the white oak. Then I take the brass rod and I shove it all the way into that hole. All the way. And I do the same thing up top here. A little 5-minute epoxy, and I shove the brass rod all the way in there. Now because I measured, I can insert this walnut divider and it's not running into that brass rod. And because we drilled the hole so deep in the white oak, once we get this walnut divider seated, we can pull that brass rod out of that hole just a little bit and into the corresponding hole on the walnut. Just like this. But obviously we want it to stay there and not fall back out, hence the 5-minute epoxy that's going to hold it nice and tight. And 5 minutes. And I do the exact same thing to the other side, inserting my second cup divider piece and sliding my brass rods into their necessary circular mounting indentations, also known as holes. Once this epoxy dries, those brass rods will not be coming back out. So make sure your holes are drilled in the right spot and they're exactly where you want them. Then, to all you haters out there that were like, this doesn't look like a cup storage device, blah, 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 which probably was none of you. I kind of just made up that dialogue on my own and have been holding it against you this entire video. Anyways, now look, I add those other internal dividers within my cup storage and boom, cup storage. And not just any cup storage, you can hold 4 glasses in there. And that's 3 more than you even need. So you only have to wash dishes once every 4 days, which is pretty awesome. With that, all of the parts of our cabinet are assembled. So we can bonk off these cauls and start sanding everything smooth. Bonk, technical term for removing cauls. So reluctantly, I then sanded the entire thing, just, a quick once over, get rid of all the fibrous left behinds from our plywood cauls and the such, and we were ready to start working on our splines. Remember when we glued up this bad boy? Man, you can get a lot done while you're waiting for glue to dry, which it is. Wonderful. So with our blank out of clamps, I go over to the joiner and I get a nice straight edge on one side and reveal what these glorious splines are going to look like. Then I go over to the table saw and I cut them down into uniform strips that I will use to cut up into smaller uniform strips, which I will then use for splines. Now to cut the groove for our splines, we're not going to use a regular spline jig. We need a monster spline jig. So I made this one out of scrap plywood. It's got an arm that rides on top of my table saw fence to keep it nice and aligned, and it's basically just a big 45-degree angle that I can set the entire cabinet in and cut some uniform slots into. So I raise the blade up as high as I can raise it without it coming out the inside of my cabinet. And oh boy, I'm not gonna lie, I was pretty excited to cut these because, well, this looks ridiculous. And I knew it was gonna be a ton of fun. So I just started running this entire cabinet through the dado saw. Now the splines I made are pretty big, so I decided 2 was gonna be plenty per corner. So I backed them off about an inch from each edge. And the way I make sure that they're all even is I run every single corner through with the cabinet facing out towards you guys. And then when I'm done, I flip it around and I run every single corner through with the cabinet facing the opposite direction. This makes sure I have perfectly evenly spaced spline slots, as you can see. Next, it was time to glue those bad boys into place. So I squirted out some Total Boat Thixo and I mixed it with some walnut dust. This is just going to help hide the glue should there be the odd gap here or there. And it'll also help fill any voids that, might have been caused by, I don't know, this is probably not necessary. You could just use regular glue as long as your splines are nice and tight, which these are. So I just like mixing walnut and Thixo because it looks like brownie batter and it's fun. Anyways, I just kept working my way around, sticking splines and Thixo in every corner. Until finally, I ran out of corners. And with that, I decided to let those dry up and start working on mounting my cabinet doors. The project that got us into this whole cabinet mess in the first place. Now, I decided that regular Euro-style cabinet hinges would look a little goofy on a nice whiskey cabinet like this. So I went with classic butt hinges in brass because they'll match the brass rod inside the cabinet, and then I can put some brass hardware on the doors and it'll all flow together. So with a combination of my pocket knife and a router and a chisel, I mortised out little slots so that the butt hinges would perfectly be flush with the cabinet door. Just like this. This work can be a little tedious, and there's definitely a reason that not very many people use this style of hinges anymore. Well, there's just not a lot of room for error. You got to get the mortise perfect, and once it's in there, the adjustability's non-existent. So if you're going to use hinges like these, just make sure to really take your time and get your measurements exactly right before you start cutting your mortises. Next, I needed to screw the hinges to the cabinet doors, but I had to pre-drill them first. Luckily, I have these self-centering drill bits from Rockler that are made exactly for this purpose, and they perfectly center the hole right in the middle of the hole on the hinge, which is super important, especially with hinges like this, because as I mentioned, there's not really any adjustability. So you don't want to accidentally drill a hole off center and have it pull your whole hinge out of whack. So I'm telling you, just buy these Rockler self-centering drill bits, because they're worth their weight in gold. After I got my hinges mounted in my cabinet doors, I set my cabinet doors on top of my cabinet box, and I marked out where the hinges need to land on the cabinet box itself. Then I just repeated the same step I did on the cabinet doors. I traced the hinge with my pocket knife to score the wood. I took out most of the material with the router, and I cleaned it up by hand with the chisel until I had a nice tight fit on every single one of my hinges. Then it was back to the Rockler self-centering drill bit and driver, and I attached all the hinges to the cabinet box, and then reattached them to the cabinet door. And boom goes the flippin' dynamite. Doors installed. And I didn't even screw them up. So, point 1 for Jason. With my doors installed, I uninstalled them. And it was finally time to flush cut our splines and get a look for the first time at, oh man, that looks terrible. Oh, don't worry, I haven't sanded it yet. It's gonna look way better, just you wait. So after flush cutting all my splines, I pulled out the sander and a zip zap zoop. That's usually what I say for saws, but I haven't said it for a while and I've been jonesing for it. Ooh, those look pretty nice with the orange in there. Yeah. At this point I was so excited I just couldn't help myself. I had to load up the thing with some alcohol and see what it looked like. You know, just for fun. Just what I had laying around the shop. And look at that. Ooh, nice. And I also couldn't help myself and I wanted to put the doors back on, even though I'm going to have to take them right back off because I'm not done with this thing yet. But sometimes you just want to see what it's going to look like. And it's looking pretty good. Next. Now, there's one concern I had with these hinges. There's no spring in them or mechanism to hold them firmly shut. So I thought it might be a good idea to add some magnets, both on the cabinet and the inside of the door, so that when you shut the doors, they clip and stay shut. Now these aren't just any magnets, these are N52, and a bunch of other fancy scientific names after that I don't understand the meaning of. But they are the strongest magnets available in their size. And when I say strong, I mean they are ridiculously strong. And you can't buy them on Amazon. But you know where you can buy them is on my website, because I have a special hookup. So, believe me, if you buy these, you will be like, holy cow, he wasn't lying. These are the strongest magnets I have ever used in my life. Like, I had to set them that far away from the other magnet while I was working on them because they kept wanting to hook together. Because they're crazy strong. Anyways, I drilled out some holes in the cabinet doors, and I drilled out the holes on the cabinets, and I added a little bit of CA glue, and I pounded these magnets in place. But it was such a tight friction fit that I almost didn't need the glue. But what's it gonna hurt? Then the one final thing I had to take care of was adding the French cleat to the back of my cabinet. If you're not familiar with a French cleat, it's a board with a 45-degree angle cut on one end. And then you hang another board with a 45-degree angle up on the wall, and when you hang the cabinet on the wall, it marries to that other 45-degree angle, and it hangs off of it like a cleat. So to install this, I just added a bunch of glue to this walnut French cleat, and I clamped it onto the back. And yes, that will be plenty strong to hold up this entire cabinet. Believe me. Now it was time to add finish to this entire thing, which I was not looking forward to until I realized that, oh, you know what? I could just make Craig add finish to it. I mean, I don't have to be the one to put the finish on. I built the whole thing. It's time for somebody else to do a little work for once. Am I right? So Craig was very happy and willing to grab some Rubio Monocoat walnut and start applying it to every inch of this whiskey cabinet. I mean, he basically begged me to let him put finish on it, so I kindly obliged. Don't worry, I didn't make him do the entire thing. While Craig did the doors, I put finish on the actual cabinet box itself, which meant that I was the one that got to put finish on these splines and make them pop out. Well, not make them pop out. I mean, the splines didn't come out. The color of the splines popped when I put the finish on it. Really, wah, wacha, wata-ta-ta-ta-ta, woo, tui, as you can see here. And you might be saying, hey, Jason, you idiot. You forgot to put finish on the back panel. Well, no, I didn't. I have a separate little surprise for right there. I'm going to add some mirrors. But not just any mirrors. I'm going to use these acrylic mirrors because they're bendy and you can cut them on your table saw. At least you can if you don't have a saw stop. I actually tripped the brake on my saw stop because the static that built up cutting this acrylic. I mean, I could have put it in bypass mode, but I didn't, and now I'm going to have to change the cartridge. But anyways, you can cut it on a normal table saw. Next, I just spritzed a little more Thixo onto the back of my panel. You don't need a lot, because that Thixo is thick, yo. And I slid my pre-cut acrylic mirror pieces into place. Now, I've never used these acrylic mirrors, so I have no clue if they're going to look good or not. I'm taking a big gamble here after putting all this work in. But, oh, they actually look identical to regular mirrors. Literally, you would not be able to tell the difference if I hadn't shown you that they weren't real glass. And because they were acrylic, you get the fun part of peeling this plastic off. It's like unwrapping a present every time you do it. I don't know why. It's just really satisfying. And now, the back of the cabinet, well, it looks like there is no back of the cabinet because I'm really on the front of the cabinet right here. It just looks like I'm on the back because mirrors. With our mirrors installed, I was ready to put the doors on for the final time. And as you can see, those magnets are doing their job and clicking those doors shut. I love it when a plan comes together. Did I mention those magnets are for sale on my website, www.bourbonmoth.com. After getting my doors installed, I installed this brass hardware I got from Rejuvenation, because I know you're going to ask. And I filled the entire cabinet up with bourbon. You know, for not being a very big cabinet, it does hold up to 12 bottles, which is pretty good. And those 4 glasses in the middle. And with that, our whiskey cabinet is complete. Between the walnut and oak doors with that orange backer, the walnut and orange splines, the brass, man, I just really like the way this thing turned out. And the best part, well, the best part is it's full of bourbon. And with that, I could really only think of one appropriate way to end this video.
Oh, that was a doozy. It's a lot of work for a little cabinet. But, I mean, you can't argue with the results. I mean, forget about what the cabinet looks like. It's full of delicious bourbon, so it's a winner. I mean, I could have got a cardboard box and stuck bourbon in it, and I would have been happy. But hopefully you guys enjoyed that video. You learned something, and you saw the whole thing be completed you know, all that fancy stuff. Who cares about that? Did you go over to Patreon and sign up for our Patreon contest so that I can come build something with you in your shop? There's a link down there. Go sign up for Patreon, enter the competition, and then I'll come out to your shop and we'll do video. If you win. I mean, you have to win first, but then I'll come out to your shop and do video, and it'll be a lot of fun.